After almost 10 years of waiting, the FAA finally dropped its proposed rule for Section 2209. So if you fly drones, whether recreationally or commercially, well, this one kind of matters for you. And the window to do anything about it closes on August 5th after it was extended from the original deadline of July 6th. So stick around because at the end, I'll show you exactly how to file a comment that is going to get read. So what is Section 2209? Well, back in 2016, Congress told the FAA to build a process that is going to let certain critical infrastructure sites across the country ask for drone flights to be restricted over their facilities. Now, 10 years later, 2 more congressional reauthorizations and an executive order later, well, guess what? The FAA has finally issued a proposed rule. And these are going to be called UAFR, Unmanned Aircraft Flight Restrictions. Now, important framing here before we go any further. This is a proposed rule. This is not law just yet, okay? No UAFRs exist today. The rule is set up with an application process. Nobody's airspace is actually getting restricted the moment that this passes. Sites are going to have to apply one at a time and prove their cases, okay? There's going to be 2 tiers. A standard UAFR, that's going to be the default, and that standard UAFR is going to have a horizontal boundary that's going to be inside of the applicant's property line, and it's going to default to a ceiling of 400 feet AGL, which kind of makes sense. So the restriction is capped at the property line, 400 feet, not just a giant bubble over the entire neighborhood. And here's the catch though. It's not a full restriction like a temporary flight restriction or a restricted area that you might be familiar with. You likely will qualify to fly through one of these. There's going to be more on that in a second. Now, the other type of restriction is a special UAFR, and that's the heavier tier if you want. Eligibility here is going to be limited to facilities that are owned, operated, or sponsored by federal security or intelligence agencies or by military departments, and these are going to carry a 5-year designation. Operations within a special UAFR is going to require both permissions from the using agency and then also approval from the FAA administrator or whoever they decide to do that. And here's the teeth. When issued for national security or homeland security purposes, they would be designated as national defense airspace and carry criminal penalties if they are violated. Now, this is a special one, not the typical one, the traditional one that we talked about earlier. So who can apply, you might be wondering? Well, the good news is that it's not just anyone. A site has to fall within one of 16 critical infrastructure sectors: energy, chemical, water, nuclear, transportation, defense, healthcare, and so on. There's a few more after that. Now, applicants bear the burden here of proving that a restriction is necessary. This is a big if. This is very important. They have to show real drone traffic, a specific vulnerability, and existing security measures that are already in place, restricted access, security personnel, and then also monitoring. They also need the capability to receive and log broadcast remote ID information from drones that are going to be operating nearby. And the scale here is kind of the headline number. The FAA identified approximately 125,000 fixed site facilities that could be considered as a UAFR, potential site. Now, based on the criteria proposed by the FAA in the NPRM, the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, the FAA estimates that they are going to receive about 9,000 UAFR applications over the next 5 years, so not 125,000. And the big one here, what does that actually mean for you? Well, if you're a recreational flyer that's flying under 49 USC 44809, no flying in a UAFR, period. If you're flying under Part 91, 107, upcoming 108, Part 135, or Part 137, then there's going to be a transit pathway. So operations that are conducted under 91, 107, 108, 135, 137 that I just mentioned, these are permitted, okay? Provided that you meet some requirements. The first one being that you comply with remote ID requirements, as it is under 14 CFR Part 89. Chances are you're already doing that. Also, provided that you provide advance notice to the fixed site facility. Now, here's the part that is worth understanding. Notification is not approval. I did specifically say that you provide advance notice, okay? You tell the site that you're going to be transiting through the airspace, and the site really cannot deny you. You're just providing them information. Now, as far as advance notice, you might say, how far is advance notice? There's no actually any word on the FAA document that tells us how far advance notice is. Now, the FAA is going to keep control here of the airspace, not the actual facility. Again, this is very important. Speaking of the facility, let's take a look at how the process is going to be for them to get a UAFR put in place. So first, each site is going to need to have authorization, meaning a single company cannot make their entire property a UAFR. In the application to the FAA, each site must show that there is a vulnerability, consequences consequences of a US-related event, incident, or occurrence. That's what they have in the document. Their UAS response plan, also their security measures, and other data that is as required by the FAA in that application. If the FAA conditionally approves it, then there's going to be an NPRM, a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, that's going to be published on the site for 30 days, where you will be able to see those and say, well, no, I don't agree with this being a UAFR, and here's the reason why. Just like you have a chance here to leave a comment on this NPRM. With that being said, there is also another pathway where the FAA says that they may put a UAFR in place if they have good cause to forego comments and notices bypassing the NPRM process. Now, if approved, that UAFR is going to be good for a maximum of 5 years. All right? So let's go ahead and talk about the good and maybe the bad from our perspective here. The good, sites have to prove that they have a need, and this is, I think, really a good thing. Restrictions are kept as small as practical. Also, certificated operators get to have a transit pathway inside of the airspace, and the FAA, not the actual facility, still controls the airspace. Now, the gap here worth thinking about is that there's no real counter-drone authority for any of these facilities. In fact, the rule explicitly says that it does not authorize geofencing, jamming, drone capture, or any form of mitigation technology. Now, you might be wondering, then what's the whole point of this? And well, we've kind of thought about that as well. So a site can know who's flying, but they cannot stop a bad actor. And the notify and fly model assumes that the people notifying are the actual honest ones that are going to be flying, which raises question about whether bad actors are going to be deterred at all. Another area here that this could be very beneficial is that it would provide a clear rule on what is and what is not a critical infrastructure. We've seen states doing their own thing over and over again over the last 10 years. With that said, the proposed rule here does not really preempt a state or local regulation regarding operating near critical infrastructure, so the states would still be able to do their own thing. Now, one more point here with the good cause to forego comment and notice for the UAFR. We believe that if this happens, if the FAA bypasses or decides to bypass the NPRM process, transparency needs to be very, very clear. The FAA should be required to share the cause and the rationale for having an immediate implementation of a UAFR without having the public make a comment. And this is exactly why the comment period actually exists, okay? The FAA is asking for input on this NPRM right here. The FAA is specifically asking for input on the scope of the 16-sector framework. Should there be more? Should there be less? What additional operations should be allowed through a UAFR? Maybe we want to think about the folks that are flying recreationally here, but maybe I'll get back to that in a second. What credibility information operators should provide, and then also the economic impact on commercial operators if the transit is restricted. And I think this is also a very important one here that you want to talk about. Now, regarding recreational operators, unfortunately, they're not included in here. Our thought is that possibly it's because Part 107 operators have to go through a TSA check. A recreational user would not be able to. So that's more than likely the reason behind it. But if you want to comment on that and think that recreational operators should be allowed, then you should be making that comment. So here's how you can actually comment. It takes about 5 minutes. Go to regulations.gov. You're going to search the docket number. This is FAA 2026-4558. Now, comments, like I said, have been pushed from July 6th to actually August 5th. One note here, comments are public, so don't put anything in there that you wouldn't want to see attached to your name. A good comment is specific. Don't just say, I don't like this. Tell them how it is going to affect your operation, your business, your routes, your cost. The FAA literally has to read and respond to substantive comments. So a concrete real-world example here is going to carry a lot more weight than a form letter. Now the ball is in your court.